to start the regular season, this coming after pleading guilty to 2 third-degree felony charges involving a serious bodily injury and racing on a highway causing bodily injury. Rice will be eligible to return for the Chiefs in Week 7 of the season. Here with national reporter Jeff Darlington, analyst Louis Redick, I'm Phil Murphy. Jeff, what more can you tell us about the league's decision here?
Well, Phil, we know the seriousness of the nature of Rashee Rice's situation. He was sentenced to 30 days in jail, which a sentence that he can take whenever he chooses per the judge's orders. Now the NFL essentially saying 6-game suspension. What is so interesting about this timing is that originally we did not anticipate this suspension starting at the week 1 of the regular season. His disciplinary hearing was not scheduled until September 30th. So the thought was after that they would come down with their ruling and perhaps he would serve that suspension later on. The NFL and the NFLPA instead coming to terms on a suspension that Rice did accept. So it will be 6 games at the start of the season. The Chiefs will have to figure it out without Rashee Rice for what feels like the first half of the season.
Louis, from a schematic standpoint, we've seen this Chiefs offense start slow in recent seasons. We knew a decision was coming for Rice. Now we know 6 games. What's your level of concern for the function of this offense while he's out?
Yeah, look, it's a big hit because Rashee is a multi-tool player, meaning he can line up at all 3 wide receiver spots. He can line up at the X, he can line up at the Z, he can line up at the E in the slot. And so that is a big component that they're going to wind up missing. But look, I think obviously Brett Veach understood that at some point during this season he was not going to have him. And so he had to go out and make sure that this wide receiver core was able to carry the load for however long he was going to be missed. And that means, look, Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown are going to have to really step up. Xavier is going to have to take another step in his development. Hopefully Hollywood can stay healthy. And he is a guy who can be an absolute game breaker. And then Tyquan Thornton's emergence this preseason, that's another big part of it. Brashard Smith catching balls out of the backfield. These guys are going to have to be big right out of the gate because, look, they got some heavyweights right out of the gate. The Chargers are a serious contender, I believe, this year. The Philadelphia Eagles, we already know what they bring to the table. So these guys are going to have to lean on Patrick Mahomes. Patrick's got to lean on them. And just remember this name, too. Travis Kelce is going to have to step up right out of the gate and say, hey, look, I need to really carry the load here and set the tone. I'm a future Hall of Famer. I didn't have a great season in 24. I want to set the tone right. And what better way to do it, Jeff, right? I mean, when you're talking about the fact that he has to step in for the fact that Rashee Rice is not going to be there. They have the wherewithal to do it. They have the coaching staff to be able to make up for it.
Yeah, not to diminish the 6-game suspension. The only thing I would add to that is that from the Chiefs' perspective, when you talk about personnel, they'd rather have these guys available at the end of this season than the beginning of the season like they did last year. They want to make sure that they've got everything set. So in a weird way, I hate talking about these suspensions and setting aside, obviously, the seriousness of the nature that led to the suspension, but just talking about the suspension itself, the Chiefs can look at this as a positive because they don't have to wait in limbo for that September 30th arbitration hearing. They can now get this out of the way for a team that will find a way to stack up enough wins to get themselves into the playoffs. And then the key for this team, like they didn't have enough time to kind of get cohesion with Hollywood Brown last year. They didn't have Rashee Rice for as long as they might have wanted. So they can now get all of these guys available at the end of the season, get themselves primed for a playoff run.
Louis, let's say it takes a minute or a few weeks for this offense to find its footing again. This defense allowed a league best 18.2 points per game the last 2 years. Yeah. 2025, is it good enough to carry them again?
Absolutely it is. Look, I think this football team, I've said this all along, this football team may not win as many games as they won a year ago. And look, they only lost 1. Yeah. But I think they are better in 2025 for sure from a personnel perspective, 1 through 53. Defense, look, they've got young playmakers at all 3 levels. Brett Veach has done a fantastic job of drafting, and Steve Spagnuolo, the head of the defensive charge, has done a nice job, a fantastic job developing them. So think about it this year. They add a guy like Aston Gelati out of Louisville to go on this defensive line along with Chris Jones, and there you see George Karlaftis on your screen. They are super high on Aston Gelati. And then think about, now a new safety, Jaden Hicks, who's been there a couple years now in this system, and now he is ready to break onto the scene. Trent McDuffie is already a stud. Nick Bolton is already a stud. They are loaded, and I think this team, without a doubt, is built to withstand the kind of loss they're going to suffer with Rasheed not being available early on.
The Chiefs being better is a scary proposition. They allowed just 20 points 4 times all of last year in the regular season when their starters played. We're not counting Week 18 against the Broncos. Other receiving news, 2025, starting to feel like 2015 with some of these homecomings. Back to Skull. The Panthers traded Adam Thielen to the Vikings back up north where it all started for him. He was an undrafted free agent out of Minnesota State. And you see 22-year-old J.J. McCarthy gets another efficient wide receiver, highest receiving percentage by receiver amongst the last 2 seasons, 150 targets. Thielen's one, and then it's royalty. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Smith, Nico Collins, Jamar Chase. Jeff, the Vikings lost Rondale Moore, a free agency acquisition in the preseason. We know they don't have Jordan Addison for the first few games. How important was it for Minnesota to add some depth to this receiving room?
Yeah, I mean, they're banged up across the board. Even Justin Jefferson dealing with a little bit of an ailment. Now, he'll be fine, but ultimately they had to find depth at the wide receiver position. Adam Thielen was a guy that there's been chatter behind the scenes that they were targeting for a trade. No one really necessarily, I think, expected it to happen. Or if you didn't expect it to happen, it's because you didn't think Carolina would be willing to give up the guy who's made Bryce Young as comfortable as he's been the last year. So I think that might have been the biggest mystery of this, but no question about it. It made perfect sense for the Vikings, not just because Adam Thielen is comfortable in Minnesota where he started his career, but also simply because he's the kind of veteran presence that will be very good for J.J. McCarthy when he does need this depth as a rookie starter.
Lewis, a sensible move. How much does this move help Minnesota this season?
Oh, it helps him tremendously simply because of what Jeff was alluding to. The fact that, one, he brings a veteran presence to the wide receiver room. He brings a veteran presence to the offensive meeting room. And specifically, he is someone that, along with Justin Jefferson, can go to J.J. McCarthy and really keep him on the straight and narrow and keep him nice and even-keeled, although I don't think J.J. McCarthy has any problem with that. And J.J. has a previous relationship with Adam Thielen already. So this is brilliant on the part of the front office of the Minnesota Vikings and Kevin O'Connell. This is exactly the kind of addition that they need, especially given the fact that Jordan Addison isn't going to be available at the beginning of the year. I think it just makes sense. I am all for making sure that you mix and match within different positional rooms in terms of veterans and young guys, because young guys need that leadership. Obviously, you don't want a bunch of exceptions, meaning older guys who are on the downside of their career, but you want to hit the sweet spot. And I think Adam Thielen going to Minnesota is one of those examples of hitting the sweet spot.
And his second stint in purple and gold starts right here on ESPN Week 1 Monday Night Football in Chicago. Other side of the coin, this is a big loss for Bryce Young, who looked great toward the end of last season. Young had a 95 QBR when targeting Thielen. Compare that to just 31 when targeting any other wide receiver. Young also threw for nearly 3 more yards per attempt and had a 20% better completion percentage when targeting 35-year-old Thielen. Lewis, end of last year, Young was terrific. 10 total touchdowns, no turnovers the last 3 games. Now you subtract the main target. How do you grade the talent around Young in Carolina as he tries to make the next step?
Look, obviously, it's young and unproven, but you know what? They're trying to go young. They're trying to build for the long haul, and what better way to do it than to get a bunch of guys who are around the same age and just let them grow together. Now, you have to understand that there's going to be some lumps along the way because you have some inexperience, particular at the wide receiver spot, and you have to take your time. And you see there on your screen, look, Shedeur McMillan, Xavier Legette, Jalen Carter, Jimmy Horn Jr., these guys are all going to have to grow along with Bryce, earn his trust. Bryce is going to have to get to know them, but they're all super skilled. Look at some of the highlights on your screen right now. I mean, Xavier Legette can fly, and he is a monster of an athlete. Shedeur McMillan is one of those high risers down the field that can make Lynn Swann-type catches with one hand, contort his body in the air. These are kind of things that you're looking for as a scouting department and as a coaching staff. They just need to grow together now, and you need to manage your expectations accordingly.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything bad about Dan Morgan, GM, making these calls because he is smarter than me, will beat me up. But that being said, it is slightly peculiar to me just because Adam Thielen was such a safety net for Bryce Young. And that's not to take away what Young did last season. And I do applaud the idea of going young. They've drafted 2 wide receivers in the first round each of the last 2 years. It just feels like maybe they could have gone another year with that veteran presence in Adam Thielen, but they got some trade value out of it. They feel obviously very good about these young guys. They want to move forward with them. And I will say this, it obviously speaks volumes not just to how they feel about those young receivers, but how they feel Fluke by any means